The second to last session for day one will be on airport and ground safety. And this will have a particular focus on Hong Kong. This session will be presented by Chris Barrow, who's based in Hong Kong. He's the Director of Flight Operations at Hong Kong Business Aviation Center. Chris, when you're ready, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Hey, so hi everyone. I'm Chris from Hong Kong Business Aviation Center. I just wanted to go for a few items on safety and ground handling and how we manage those here. So for those that are not aware of Hong Kong Business Aviation, we started in 1998 and we're the only FBO in Hong Kong. And we basically serve all business aviation flights and non-scheduled flights in Hong Kong International Airport. So we're the only facility that does that here. We commit to safety, service, and style. So safety is one of our core mission statements. We put a lot of value and trust into this word, and we have a real long-term vision for that. We're the first international FBO in Asia that possesses self-finance facilities, CIQ, and actually an on-site fuel hydrant, which is fairly rare for business aviation use. And also we're AsBAA Stage 2 accredited and best Asian FBO for the last 13 years. Okay, so just some basic on our facilities. So we have our own parking apron, which can accommodate up to 30 aircraft, and hangarage up to 13 aircraft. So I noticed from the last presentation that there was a bit of focus on an aircraft being able to go into the hangar. Yes, we have 3 hangars here, and basically they can accommodate up to BBJ and ACJ size aircraft. But they are limited space in Hong Kong. We only have space for these 13 aircraft, and I think the demand normally outweighs the supply. We also have our terminal facility, which has our passenger lounge. I'll skip through this very quickly as it's not really focused towards the safety. And crew lounge and CIQ hall. So the CIQ hall is quite important. It makes things a lot quicker for the customers. And also where we do security screening, which for us, from a safety point of view, was actually one of the items that was highlighted by a lot of our passengers. So we invested heavily in that area. Okay, so safety in Hong Kong Business Aviation Center. So how do we approach safety? So essentially, we look at things for a long-term view. So all of our areas of expertise we look at for a long-term view. So safety for us, we always look at it in 2 ways. So we look at software and hardware. So in terms of hardware, items like the apron, the hangars, ensuring GSE, things like that, is something that we treasure as part of the safety process. So more often than not, the part of hardware has to match the software, which is the employees itself. So in terms of that, we're always willing to invest in infrastructure, make sure that we can get the right facilities for our customers to come into and follow process from A to B, and make sure that the customer comes in and goes away, and the aircraft comes and goes away in a safe process. We also look to follow international regulations. So in Hong Kong International Airport, we basically have to follow ICAO regulations to a large degree, which is probably a little bit different to most FBOs, particularly in Europe and USA, which kind of have their own rule book. We are able to sort of meet ICAO regulations to a large extent, and also we follow AsBAA, which is obviously the IBAC ground handling program. The reason we follow that is because we want to make sure that we are on board with the international community. We're an international hub, and if we can keep up to speed and make sure that we're at the top of our game, then essentially that we can improve and learn from our areas. Also, we value the local community. So actually, I think if we look at the current situation in Hong Kong with aircraft on ground, a lot of collaboration with existing tenants, operators. In terms of safety and how we handle aircraft which are on ground, I think typhoons at this point of time is very important. I think anyone that recently has been listening to anything I have to say, I'm quite repetitive on the typhoon situation in the region. This year it is a lot longer than normal. Normally this would be closed around September to October time, but in November we still have typhoons in the region. So at this point in Hong Kong, we really have to adapt, review our safety measures, actually increase our safety measures, and actually work with all those key stakeholders to make that happen. I think if we consider how many different stakeholders we have in Hong Kong, it's probably a lot more than other FBOs. Most FBOs normally cooperate with maybe one maintenance provider or one service provider. However, we have a large range of different providers. So what we do in terms of safety also has to match what the customers and the operators do in terms of safety as well. So understanding that local community is actually beneficial to making things a lot safer as a business for all of us, because there are a lot of different people touching the aircraft in different manners. We're also open to sharing with all of our customers, so we do a lot of sharing sessions, and recently we had our safety meetings, we have operators meetings, and safety reporting, things like that for all of the tenants on site. I think it's important that we receive comments, learn from those comments, address those comments, or take those comments on board for future items. I think everyone is coming from different parts of the world, and I think if we can gradually learn from each other, then it makes it a safer place to be. I think in general, not much sharing in terms of ground handling actually happens. I know we have a lot of regulations, a lot of rules, but it's not too common to hear about incidents that happen elsewhere around the globe, particularly ground incidents. Generally, for aircraft incident, there's a lot of sharing, but for ground incidents, typically there isn't too much to find out from other companies. So any input we can get from other parties is also beneficial to us to make sure that we can improve for the future. Okay, so as with every other company, SMS and documentation obviously is the key in terms of safety. So obviously for our SMS, we constantly work and improve on that. We've been realistically, I think if we look at the last 5 years when we've been looking to work with AsBAA and the AsBAA program and the airport authority who are under the ICAO guidelines, we've done a lot of work on our SMS. We've done a lot of improvements. We can see the benefits of that. We can see how we share that information with the community in terms of things like risk assessment, safety sharing, management of change, all of these type of things that actually we've seen great deals of improvement on. I think sometimes we can get a bit bogged down by details and documents. However, generally at the start of any process, particularly for my safety team, that we come back to the small details, and quite often the small details start with some of the documentation. And if we don't get those documentation areas right, then chances are later on in the operation or in any potential incident or situation, then actually we become caught out by that situation. So I think having a good SMS is in place, and there's a great value in working with the internationally recognised organisations such as AsBAA to achieve that. As I mentioned, we're AsBAA Stage 2, so we've been focusing heavily on AsBAA for the last sort of 4 years, and we hope to achieve Stage 3 next year, which will be a big achievement for the company. I think as we also are doing this internally, we don't have for SMS, we have to have a very set system to comply with the authority's requirements. So it's very difficult to just take details off the shelf and put them in place. We have to really do it as an individual setup. So working with AsBAA has been really good for us to make sure that we align, we do things together, that we do things in the right manner, and gradually improve. I think we have to again look at the long term. You won't see major safety changes overnight, and I think in the region you know, really pushing that message on safety, raising the bar, is in line with that AsBAA and AVAC program. So we really buy into that. We see the benefits it brings to the company, and we fully support, you know, that process. So up here that we're regularly audited. So why I mention this is that we have a lot of audits through Civil Aviation Department, the airport authorities, and also do audits amongst the line maintenance operators, MROs, and the 145s, also in line with Shell Aviation. So with these audits that we do, that are taken upon us, and also that we take upon those parties that subcontract from us, we can see a lot of communication sharing, we can see a lot of improvements. We can demonstrate how each customer is able to get value from the safety here, because it's fully documented and in line with authorities' process. So I think if we look back, for me personally, 5 years or so ago, from that point up to today, I have full confidence in our team when we do any audits, and it's a real big achievement for us to have that kind of assurance when we're doing any audits. So we also do audits on our third parties, which is good to ensure our customers are happy that the companies based on site are actually audited as well. So whilst they also have CAD audits in general, sometimes with the ground handling activity they may not do that. So that's where we come in and make sure that the people who are working on site here are doing the right things as well. We work with Signature Flight Support, so they're the largest FBO chain in the world. So for that, we get shared on their safety practices and incidents and things like that, if there's any applicable. And I think because of their scope and network, it is far more likely that we will see any incidents that might happen worldwide. Going to America or the Caribbean or even in Europe and things like that. It's good that we can actually obtain that information without actually having to learn the hard way. So for us, whenever we get any information, we take that on board, see if we can update our procedures, see if there's anything we can learn by that, and avoid that from happening. And I think that's what one of the things that's beneficial for HKBAC is that we have that support to work on. A lot of other companies may sometimes struggle to get that type of information, and as I mentioned, it's not something that we generally share in the community, and I think even from AVAC or AsBAA's perspective, I know when we discussed with them that's something that we also would like to see improve. We understand the difficulty in that because it's very difficult to sort of give out information that might seem damaging to a company. But in terms of safety, the more sharing that people can do, the better. So hopefully over the next few coming years, I think we'll see a lot more sharing in that manner. Okay, so I generally like to look at a few examples. So I think it's very easy to say, we're safe, or safety is in our mindset and things like that. But I think if I show you a few examples of how we have sort of made things safer in our premises, it's a bit more of a dedicated example of what we are committed to, rather than just saying that we're safe. So the first one is our apron. So actually we have a business aviation parking plan, and we had that changed in line with the authorities, CAD and Airport Authority. It was not an easy task. So currently ICAO standard is 4.5 meters for courtesy aircraft, and we were able to have a parking plan, multi-parking plan for 3 meters for courtesy aircraft, up to ACJ, BBJ size. So that actually is a lot safer for our towing teams, a lot safer for parking. I appreciate that this year, and I know Phil mentioned in the last slides that we had some issues in capacity for the downtime during COVID. But as a general process, we were able to get this parking plan, which actually suits the business needs and allows us to have more aircraft, maximise the space whilst having a safe process in place. Now, from that, obviously, we can handle up to BBJ and ACJ, but obviously we now know that we have the new models entering the market, and I'm sure that there will be maybe more to follow, but at least for the next sort of 5 to 10 years, I think the new Global Express and the new Gulfstream G700 are going to be the two aircraft that are particularly coming into this region. So rather than just wait and keep on doing what we're doing, we're going to keep looking to improve the stand allocation and make more stop bars and stop lines for the G700 and Global 7500. So I think that just shows that we're not just do one thing once. We'll constantly review it. We'll risk assess it every year. We'll go through the process, and now we see that there's a change in parking that allows us to actually do something a bit different to make sure that we can address the customer's needs whilst doing it in a management of change process and actually be safer for our customers. Okay, so as most people know, we have a limited parking availability in our apron, so we do have aircraft that park in the remote parking stands. But actually, over the last 5-6 years, we've done a lot of work with the airport authorities to provide multi-parking stands. So they are actually 4.5 meters, so ICAO standard, but they're actually multi-parking stands, which is fairly rare on the airfield. Obviously, they're mainly code sort of D&E stands, so we're able to make use of areas and spaces around the airfield to maximise parking, but also have good safety practices. So again, with those stands, they have the correct stop bars, stop lines, towing arrangements, towing plans, and make sure that we have the best safety practices prior to the implementation of that. So anyone that's been operating here for a long time would have noticed that those stands do change from time to time. But particularly for the notebook and mic stands, which were in place for the last 2 or 3 years, it certainly allowed us to extend the parking situation, but do it in a safe manner. So again, it's practical safety. Okay, so I guess most people would associate most issues with safety for an FBO ground handling in terms of fueling or towing. So, of course, for the first part for fueling, we partnered with Shell Aviation. They perform all of our services and audits, and we want to make sure that we're at the top of our game. So, make sure that they fully regulate us and make sure that we're doing everything as we're supposed to be doing. They're the experts, so we don't want to take away from them. So, we fully support any requests, any changes, any adoption to new procedures, and we regularly send some of our staff to do training with Shell in other countries and things like that to make sure that we support the team members, and they come here to do sharing for the team as well. In line with that, we also have 3 fuel bowsers and a hydro facility. So again, that's sort of the 2 parts. It's the hardware and software part of it. It's not just one or the other. Repair and maintenance is at the top of our agenda, making sure that those GSEs are in line, and making sure that when we do testing, that it's all clear and good to go. So I think in terms of Hong Kong International Airport, it's generally a safe place for fuel. It's thoroughly tested. It's got to go through the PAF facility and also through the fuel farm here prior to it going into the fuel hydrant system or the fuel bowsers. So actually the process is pretty safe in terms of those key milestones before you can even get to fueling any aircraft here in BAC. And aircraft towing. So obviously aircraft towing, we do that for all aircraft arrival, departure, parking, and I'll come on to a bit more of that in a moment. But aircraft towing is generally the most common issue for safety in business aviation or ground handling. Generally, it's the highest issue in terms of money for damage and things like that. So it's a real risk, and we have to manage that in a safe manner and look which ways we can do to improve that. So for the fuel, I'll come on to that a little bit more. So for that, we also have the bowsers that we have investment, but we also have a new bowser which we're bringing into service in 2021. We actually have that on site now, but we're going through the commissioning process, which is a little bit slow due to the COVID restrictions. But there's new cheap requirements for fueling with water sensor technology, and those type of changes are slightly delayed from what they were planned to be at the end of this year. But effectively, there'll be changes in fuel technology so that we migrate away from SAP technology. So essentially, that any issues with fuel should be removed, and we're looking to make sure that we're in line with that, make sure we're on top of that. A lot of companies and businesses are kind of trying to hold back, but for us, we're trying to make sure that we're in line with those requirements and follow what Shell advises that a key part of the jig boarding process. Okay, so for towing, I think towing training is a major part of ensuring that the team are doing the right thing. So we regularly review this. Every year we go through our training manuals. Every time we have any issues, near miss, any comments, and we'll review those procedures as well. But generally we'll do that every year, and always do case sharing and highlight to all the team. So I think it's very easy for somebody to have an issue and maybe not mention it, but in terms of getting that message across to the team to report things and make sure that we share information is incredibly important. And I would say it's dramatically improved over the last few years. I think it's quite a common cultural thing to maybe hold back and not say too much, but in a just culture scenario, we really need people to voice out, say what's wrong, say if they made a mistake, say if there's something that they see, and what we do with that is to share that amongst the whole team. And I think that's a case of learning things prior to making mistakes again. So we've noticed a big improvement since doing a lot more case sharing and amongst the whole business, not just the line service team who are actually towing the aircraft. I think it's important to have all members of the business involved, and sometimes with a fresh eye, they can also add some input, or maybe they've seen something somewhere else, or maybe they've seen something on LinkedIn and they can input something. So I think it's important that we do that, and we'll continue to do that. Investment in people, I think, is key. We have a good manpower ratio. We're fully supportive to keep enough members of the team on a daily basis to ensure that we can keep a safe process. I think it's very, again, easy to sort of say, oh, we want everything done safely, then there's only 2 people. And I think that's not uncommon in an FBO scenario, that there's not many people around, and everyone's doing maybe 3 or 4 different jobs, again, which is not uncommon. But for us, we try to ensure that in terms of line service, the safety measures that we have a real kind of adequate manpower around. Next point for GSE. So I think GSE is sometimes overlooked. I think people tend to keep some equipment for for 15, 20 years, and I think maybe in a previous few decades that might have been the best practice. Don't get me wrong, there's some equipment that's really fit for purpose. I don't think we're opposed to that. But as a busy 24/7 operation, I don't think waiting for things to break is the best practice. So we do it the other way around, and we do a proactive repair and replacement of GSE. We have a large fleet of electro tractors and also propel tractors as per the authority requirements. But also, making sure that any other equipment that's associated with that is repaired and budgeted and capex accordingly. So I think from us as a business, we really see the value in our GSE and have a relatively new fleet for all of our equipment based on towing. And the last point here, which is I would say probably fairly unique to HKBAC, is that we had a towing simulator built, and this actually helps us to train maybe fresh or green employees, we might want to call them, instead of using live aircraft. So the towing simulator is actually set up with the same principle as for example, a Challenger 605 aircraft, roughly in terms of size and proportion, and they can tow that with a tow bar or with electrode, so that they can practice with a demonstrator, should I say, prior to actually towing live aircraft. And I think most commonly in FBOs, you would start off maybe towing some GSE around, but actually that GSE doesn't normally reflect the actual process of towing. So I think if I go back nearly 20 years ago, when I started to tow aircraft, that you would tow something like a GPU or something like that, maybe that has the same components. And kind of the assumption is that if you can tow that or push that, an aircraft is generally easier because of the wheelbase. But I think for us, we wish to improve on that. We don't want to be using GSE that we use for live operations. So having this towing simulator built was actually something that really benefited us for the towing process. And once people are trained to use that, then we can put them on the live aircraft. So I think that's quite proactive. I think that shows our investment and our sort of emphasis on safety, rather than just saying safety. Again, it's something that we actually show proactively. Okay, so our hangars. So in terms of safety, our hangars are built to withstand typhoons. So I think we've noticed, particularly in America over the last few years, with bad storms and typhoons and hurricanes, should I say, a large number of hangars that are just collapsing in those high wind situations. Our hangars are built to withstand typhoons, and the actual investment into doing that is a lot higher than what most hangars will cost to build. So we recognise that the customer's assets are the prime part of safety is to keep them protected. So we make sure that we build them in accordance with being able to withstand typhoons. And since I've been here, I've noticed maybe 2 or 3 really strong typhoons, and in every occasion, I've had full confidence in the hangars to look after those aircraft. Inside the hangars, we have a parking plan. Make sure that we have lead-in lines, boundary lines, sizing guide. Make sure that the team know what size aircraft can fit in that hangar, and make sure that when we have any towing requirements, that the wing walkers, the additional wing walkers, are in place to make sure that they can tow in and out safely. I guess I would touch on the point that in most cases, everyone focuses on hangars being an unsafe environment as opposed to the apron, but actually if we consider the outside factors of being on the apron, where there's weather issues, there's noise issues, there's generally a lot more aircraft, sometimes there's more space so people can let their guard down a little more, or there's no certain towing lines, things like that. And in the hangars themselves, in most cases, it's very tightly packed, and people are more aware, or they're heightened their senses at that time. So whilst we put a lot of effort into the hangars, we also translate that into the apron as well, because actually the kind of hangar rash situation maybe is not as common as aircraft damage whilst outside on the apron. So I think it's important to know the difference there, and sometimes just focusing on a hangar is not always the best approach. So we make sure that we focus on not only our apron, the remote apron, and also for the hangars. So in terms of towing and making sure that we can get those aircraft in and out safely, we put a lot of emphasis into our teams to make sure that they do that, and also to reduce third-party involvement in that as well. So again, Hong Kong is a little bit different to some facilities around the world, in that we have an obligation to use some third parties for towing, particularly from the remote parking stands. But actually, we were able to achieve our own towing team in negotiation with the airport authority to make sure that we can do a large percentage of that towing. Now, not only does that improve time, safety, but it's also a lot more higher customer service for our customers at the same time. So we see that as a bit of a win-win-win, that safety is at the heart of that every time. Okay, so aircraft marshalling. So our facility has set starting and stop points. So for us, we marshal in every aircraft and depart every aircraft under marshalling. We have set locations where those aircraft can park and depart from, and we find that whilst it can be a little bit restrictive, but actually the main purpose of that is to make sure that the aircraft can arrive and depart safely, and make sure that we know that there's a sufficient spacing, and we know that for the aircraft to taxi out safely. I think obviously most FBOs around the world may have fairly tight, compact parking, and when the air crew sort of get a taxi out, they sometimes need 2 wing walkers on each side just to make sure that it's safe. So how we like to do that proactively is to have a sufficient taxiing in and out spot at the right time. So actually that makes it a lot more safer. You know, the passengers and crew, when they're taxiing in and out, don't feel like they might hit another aircraft because there's a lot of space around it. So actually from that point of view, it's a much safer process. And actually, you can see that normally from the crew members who I think when I first came here, they were asking that maybe if we could move the stop bar to a bit further out so that they could see aircraft a bit clearer. So we took that message on board and moved that back another 15 feet. So actually, again, we listened to what some of the crew have to say. If they've got anything that they can see as their safety improvement, then we'll take that on board and make it even safer. So, so for that area, I think it's a pretty safe environment operating HKBAC. We move on to baggage handling. So I think what's quite unique about Hong Kong, not a lot of companies around the world use belt loaders for luggage. Now, there's two sides to this equation, of course, is that you know, anytime you put GSC near an aircraft, there's always a risk. So obviously we take that on board and put measures in place with that. But also I think you know, it's easy to forget that the employees themselves have to carry the luggage, and I'm sure if anyone's been around an FBO or had to do that for themselves, I know I certainly have, is that tend to be a lot of heavy baggage going on and off these aircraft. So it's not uncommon for employees to hurt their backs for luggage to be dropped because something is just clearly too heavy, and you might find that you'll find two crew members handing down one piece of luggage, and then you know one line technician is at the bottom to take that on board, and if it's too heavy, then that person's either going to get injured, or they're going to drop the luggage and cause an injury or damage the luggage itself. So we use a belt loader, and we have different ones for different types of aircraft, and we're actually looking to get another one on board. I think if we look at the 7500, it's certainly it sits a lot higher for the aircraft. So we need to look at equipment that helps the employees as well as sometimes the crew, because also the crew don't want to be holding bags down. So that's a process I think not too many FBOs around the world do, and I think for us we can see the benefit of doing that for the crew, for the staff, for the aircraft. So I think that's something that we proactively look at. Okay, so just ground service equipment again. So just an example of some of our equipment. Generally, we look to invest in all these type of pieces of equipment. You know, portable water, laboratory carts, tow tractors, GPUs, fuel bowsers, belt loaders, tow bars. Make sure that we have yearly reviews of all of those. Make sure that if we need to look to purchase or to increase our GSC fleet, or remove things from service, particularly in line with the requirements from the airport authority on electric equipment. So we know that over the next few years, that virtually everything we need to be is electric. So every time we buy a new GSC now, we're looking to make sure it's electric. So it's got to be safe and it's got to be green. And I think those two items are the key sort of topics for the future. So again, we will proactively look at that and make sure that we're on top of our game for that, so that the hardware matches the software that we're trying to improve. Okay, so just a last topic here. So just aircraft ground incidents in Hong Kong. So if you have an incident in Hong Kong or there's any ground damage, then what we will do is we'll notify the customer and operator as soon as possible. Pending the scenario, obviously depending on the location. So we will, as soon as we're made aware, then we will let those customers know. We'll also notify the airport authority. So any incident on the apron, any apron in Hong Kong International Airport, we need to advise the airport authority, even inside our own BAC apron. And then basically they will determine some basic information and advise whether they will choose to visit the location. So in that situation, we would aim to leave the aircraft exactly where it is. We won't move that aircraft unless there's some emergency reason to, or if the pilot in command maybe chooses that he wishes that to be removed for a particular reason. At that situation, we will advise them that if they're doing that, that doesn't give the airport authority the opportunity to review the incident. But ultimately, if they're the pilot in charge, we will comply with that request. After that, the authorities will organise an AGI panel meeting, and generally the representative from the aircraft, it could be the operator, it could be the owner, depending on the aircraft situation, and we'll advise them to come along as well. And during that process, they will review the whole situation. They will see if they have any CCTV to support anything, particularly if it's in the remote parking stands, review all procedures, any processes, any investigation methods, interviews with staff, and basically see that they can determine what went wrong. At that point, they will advise either maybe BAC, the third-party operator, line service franchisee, to make any changes or to determine any process for improvement at that point. And after that, then the case would be closed. Sometimes it can take a little bit of time to get those meetings underway because of organising it with various parties, but we'll do that as soon as possible and as soon as the airport can arrange those. So generally, that's how the process goes for any ground incident. Okay, thank you very much for your time, and maybe if there's any questions, I could feel free to answer that.
Thank you, Chris, for a very thorough presentation from the HKBAC. We'll give it a few minutes for any questions.